LSU Florida State for a second consecutive year. We got Matt Moscona here, ESPN Baton Rouge, ESPN New Orleans. After further review, Matt, it's been a long time. I wanted so badly to get you on here just to get a quick take on this matchup that was obviously down to the wire, nail biter last year. And I think both teams have elevated, so it could be an even better game this time with greater stakes at the end of the season.
And Mark, I think it is, first of all, it's a dramatically different feeling than a year ago. Remember last year, Florida State was, there weren't great expectations for Florida State. I think from an LSU perspective, people around this program and fans certainly were very confident a year ago. The game was in New Orleans. Florida State had fallen on hard times. And LSU's back-to-back 500 seasons, I think, were largely ignored here. And losing that game the way they did was kind of a pretty stark reminder of how far LSU had to go. So the fact that both teams went on to have 10-win seasons, won their bowl games in Orlando, and now enter this season top 10. There's a lot of nervous energy here this week, Mark. It's a sharp contrast from a year ago where there was a ton of confidence. Now it's hey, if you're really going to be a national championship contender, you got to win this game, because if you don't, you've left yourself no margin for error. We know there's never been a 2-loss team make the playoff.
It's difficult, Matt, for me to separate these two teams, even starting by the two quarterbacks. They're similar in so many ways, and then filtering through wide receiver cores and everything. It's difficult to separate these teams. I do think that LSU's offensive line and all the growth that those young pups experienced throughout last season is major in them controlling the line of scrimmage, obviously, and then allowing the playmakers to do what they do.
Yeah, I think if you go 1 to 85, LSU is a more talented team. Like if you look at star ratings and then, draft prospects, stuff like that. Now that's obviously with tremendous amount of respect for guys like Jared Verse and Keon Coleman. And obviously Jordan Travis, now a 6th-year senior. But 1 to 85, LSU is probably a more talented team, but Florida State has a ton of experience. They return more production than any team in college football. So there's a little bit of that. But I do like what you said there, Mark. And the biggest question, Brian Kelly kind of reminded us of this earlier this week. LSU, at this point a year ago, going into that Florida State game, that game week, they hadn't even settled their starting 5 on the offensive line. They didn't know Monday of game week who their 5 offensive linemen were going to be. Now, you look at the year Will Campbell and Emory Jones had, you have legit bookend tackles that are NFL prospects. You've got a starting 5 on the offensive line and a 2 deep that have all played a ton of ball now. So, Mark, I think LSU's offense this year is going to be really good. They have got shocker. LSU's got really good receivers, right? They've always had really good receivers, but they got 8 scholarship running backs. They're 2 deep on the offensive line at every position. They got a fifth-year quarterback that started every game of his college career. This offense should be really good. And it's, Florida State's going to have a tough time handling this offense, but I think every defense is going to have a tough time with this offense. The big question for LSU, Mark, is going to be the other side of the ball.
Matt, we saw 2 much lower end teams in Minnesota and Nebraska, but very evenly matched, play a sloppy game. And I think in the end, there was a difference between PJ Fleck's 7th season, Matt Rule first game. 1 year ago, Brian Kelly, for as good as he is, first game. Do you think that makes a major difference that it's a full season under his leadership now?
Yes. Just to illustrate that a little bit, when Brian Kelly was hired, one of the first things he did is he implemented this daily accountability exam, for lack of a better word, where every player had to fill out this accountability form. How much did you sleep? What did you eat? Did you work out? All these different things. And that was a standard expectation in his program. Well, a year ago, he was having to remind everybody and teach them all what the expectations were. Now it's second nature. So yes, I think that is an absolute fair point, that there's just a lot more comfort. Jaden Daniels said this week he feels 20 times better and more comfortable than he did a year ago. Now, I don't think you'd get 20 times the production if you did. That would dust even Joe Burrow's season, which that's not going to happen. But yes, that comfort level, knowing what the expectations are, and honestly, Mark, this team, the team a year ago, in many respects, they were building the bridge as they crossed it. They were learning. Keep in mind, Harold Perkins didn't even play against Florida State. He had one tackle, I think it was on special teams. He hadn't even figured in to the defense yet. Now he's, ESPN put out their list of the top 100 players in college football. He's number 4 on the list. Guy wasn't even playing at this point. So, yes, they know their personnel. The personnel knows the coaches, the expectations. It's a dramatically different feel than it was a year ago.
Matt, you mentioned the defensive concerns. No Mason Smith, maybe the most talented of that entire group, but certainly behind Harold Perkins as a playmaker, but certainly so much expected of him. But on the back end, not up to LSU standards still.
Right, and that's the real question. So, Mason Smith, I'm sure you've talked about it on your channel, Mark. The whole thing is just, in the NIL era, the fact that we're suspending a kid for getting paid for autographs, like 3 weeks before NIL went live, is weird. But listen, they don't have another Mason Smith, right? There is no, the sum of the parts is not as great as the whole. Yeah, you don't have another one of them. But what LSU did in the transfer portal this year was they went and signed 4 dudes who have played major college football, defensive tackle, and have all played a ton of ball. So they've got a really good rotation. And Mekhi Wingo had an All-America year a season ago. So their front 7, I think, is going to be dramatically improved, even from a unit that was pretty good a year ago. But you mentioned the secondary, and you're right. When Ed Ogeron got fired and there was this mass exodus out of the program and everything that was happening therein, the secondary was probably the spot that was hit hardest. And so Brian Kelly, just to be competitive last year, had to go get a bunch of transfers. And he did, and they played pretty well. And they finished 32nd in the country in pass defense. Well, you only return one scholarship defensive back, one scholarship cornerback from a year ago. It's Terrence Welch, who's running second right now. So they had to go do the same thing all over again, go recruit a whole bunch of transfers. And we're going to see how they play. Mark, Zy Alexander was an FCS All-American. He's the best guy they got. He looks pretty good, but we'll see it in a game, right? Deuce Chestnut was all ACC at Syracuse. It's been a little bit of a challenge getting him to transition to this level and this caliber of play. J.K. Johnson is a transfer they brought in from Ohio State. He's got a broken leg. Everybody remembers Denver Harris. He was a 5-star when he signed with Texas A&M. He's running on the 3rd team right now. So that cornerback position is going to be one to watch. And honestly, Mark, I think that LSU's defensive front is going to have to supplement that defensive back. They are going to have to generate pressure and make for tough throws and rush decisions to try to alleviate some of the pressure on that secondary while they try to figure out who's going to fit in where.
The easiest way to find Matt, I think, is just to follow him on Twitter, and you see it, Matt Moscona, right there. And I've said this before, the content and the conversation with Matt is always going to be some combination of fun, funny, insightful, thoughtful, may bring you to tears at times. Any of that or all of that at any time, it is worth it. So get there, follow Matt.
This is the 3rd consecutive year, Mark, that John Emery is missing the season opener for whatever reason this time around. I don't believe it's injury related. Brian Kelly just said he's unavailable. So LSU had 8 scholarship running backs anyway, and 2 others have injury designation. So they still feel pretty good about their running back room, right? And then obviously Mason Smith being out is obviously a huge story. But at the same time, LSU's defensive tackles without Mason Smith last year stepped up without him. And look, to Kareem's super chat here, the Florida State offensive line versus the LSU defensive line. It's such a huge matchup, right? With Mekhi Wingo is returning All-American, got the number 18 uniform. And honestly, the guy, to me, Mark, I do my own grades and all that stuff, that had the highest grade for me last year in that game, outside of Travis, of course, and outside of Verse, was Fabian Lovett. And I went back and I rewatched that game and I watched him just over and over and over again. And he is a very underrated player, and LSU is going to have to deal with him and Florida State's great defensive line as well. So I know, especially James, being a former fullback himself, this game is going to be physical. It's going to come down to the trenches for me.
So I love these shows because I get to learn from you three. So I'll stay out of the way and let you guys talk ball, and I'll just soak it in. So you guys have at it.
Yeah, being basically, I agree with everything that Carter said. I think a lot of what people try to pick on Florida State about the 3 games that they had where they kind of fell. I would argue that not having Fabian Lovett was a really, really big piece of that, and also leaving that game. That game also left Jared Verse banged up. So just to start off your season with such a physical game, and I believe Mason Smith towards ACL early in it, just a lot of hitting. A hell of a way to introduce a true freshman into the world of college football. Even though the world kind of had an idea that Jared Verse was going to be good, and all the reports came out, but nobody really knew coming from FCS Albany. But still, going up against a guy like that, that's a hell of a first day to be able to come out. And just in general, Jaden Daniels' progression on that last 5 minutes of the game was extremely electric. I can't take anything from that. I mean, we can make excuses, we can make arguments, but at the end of the day, he produced, and he was able to take up large chunks of yardage and move the ball, and made that game into something where you just had to be in your seat. And I think that's sets up for a great matchup. If you're a pugilist like me and you like boxing, you see somebody and you feel like the boxer has it set up, and you feel like they should be able to win. Even if you like UFC, when you think about Usman, and when he lost the match, I can't think of the guy's name, but he literally had it won until the last minute. Yeah. Let his guard down and got a kick to the head, and the next thing you know, he's and he gets knocked out. That actually that's probably the best way to describe the FSU LSU game, except for Florida State was able to come up with something to where at the end, and I would even call it winning on the cards, as opposed to just knocking out your opponent. So when you see what they come up to, you see the injuries. Both teams have lost some things, a critical piece. I think Darrell Jackson was going to be extremely important. I think this season, adding depth. Hopefully, NCAA gives some good news. It seems like they're overturning, or at least re-looking at some people's suspensions. But when you look at it, both teams have some things that they actually are evenly matched up when you take away your bias.
See, James, somebody my age, and this even predates me, so I didn't even get to see this the first go around. Somebody my age would go with Ali and the rope-a-dope for 14 rounds, where he covered up for 14 rounds and then came out with a flurry against George Foreman in the 15th. All right, George, what do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, man, I'm like everything they said is right on the money. Both these teams kind of snuck up on everybody last year. This was 2 unranked teams meeting first game of the year, and it ends up being one of the better games all year. Comes down to a blocked extra point. Luckily, we're on the right end of that. Florida State gets the win. Like Carter said, I'm looking at the trenches. It's going to be huge. Who can win that matchup? Offensive line versus defensive line, both ways. Adding Braden Fisk for Florida State, I think, is kind of going to be the X factor for that defensive line. Can he get that pressure up the middle alongside Fabian Lovett, a totally healthy Fabian Lovett with no game one to get dinged up? They've been really, I'd say, selective with how they've used Fabian Lovett in camp. They know what he is. It's not like he's going to make some giant strides. He stayed healthy. Who's going to win that big battle in the trenches? You've got the LSU line that's young, super, super talented, bookend tackles that were ended up, I believe, freshman All-Americans by the end of the year last year. We talked about this. One of the biggest matchups is going to be the defensive backs on y'all's end versus our wide receivers. I'd like to hear, I guess, if we go somewhere else, get into the DBs, Carter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously what makes this game very spicy for LSU's defensive backfield is that they know these guys, right? A lot of them obviously are from Louisiana, and they're familiar with Keon Coleman. The opposing wide receivers were all in the same recruiting class. Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Keon Coleman and Destin Hill. So you're talking about the 4 of the 5 top receivers in this game in this matchup. It's absolutely crazy that you get this type of matchup between guys that grew up with each other. So yeah, and then obviously I know Mason Smith's not playing. Ja'Kai Douglas, they were childhood friends. They're both out. So yeah, I totally agree. It's going to be a tough matchup for LSU's defense. This is going to be Destin Hill's first game. We were talking about him briefly, and he and Aaron Anderson are both making their Division I Power 5 college debuts on Sunday, and they both went to the same high school, and they both are really hyped up. But there's this mystery around both of them, right? And it should be very interesting because they were both very similar players. I do think Aaron was a slightly better and higher rated high school recruit, but Destin Hill, his name was Destin Payson at the time, is really freaking good. If you just go back and watch his high school tape, and I think he could be an X factor for Florida State right away. So obviously, Mark, the best defensive player for LSU is Harold Perkins. And I think obviously there's really nothing you could do to prepare for Harold Perkins. He shut down Bryce Young. He shut down Lane Kiffin's offense to the point where Lane Kiffin talked about Harold Perkins at length in the press conference after last year's game. So obviously how Norvell, who's a great schemer, he does a really good job taking your best defensive players out of the game. How he does that is going to be a big key for Florida State's offense to have a big day.
I thought he was the best in college football last year. The games that I watched, he had the most impact. Auburn, the Arkansas game, he was just, if he's not on the field, they get upset. They don't win the West if he doesn't show up for that game, and others. Our guy, Kareem, is showing up. We appreciate your contribution, Kareem. And Carter touched upon this, but a little bit deeper dive. George, we'll start with you. The Florida State offensive line, your thoughts about how strong this group is against an LSU front?
Yeah, you're talking about a group that has, I believe it's 207 career starts between them. It's the most starts among any returning line in the nation. Robert Scott Jr.
207?
I believe it's up
I
at
never
207.
see that number. Good Lord.
Total, because, we brought in guys like Roddick who had like 2,000 snaps in his career.
You're right.
That's
Got it
great.
right here.
I think second place is like 50 snaps or something like crazy below, but just super, super experienced. And like I said, you bring the left tackle, Robert Scott, back. He's been your starting left tackle since he showed up as a freshman. We just released our depth chart a few days back, and he won that job over Bless Harris. Bless Harris was our starting right tackle going into last year. He ended up getting hurt in the Duquesne game. He didn't even play against LSU. He was out for the season after week 0. He's the backup on both tackle spots. Jeremiah Byers, the number 1 offensive tackle out of the transfer portal, is manning that other right tackle spot. Maury Smith, same thing as Robert Scott. He's been our starter at center past couple years. He comes back. You got Dimitri Emmanuel at left guard. He's a guy that by the end of last year was our best offensive lineman if you look at the different Pro Football Focus metrics, et cetera, et cetera. And you got Casey Roddick, another big guard on the other side. Our strength is our experience, and I feel like our line is pretty much at their ceiling. You're dealing with kind of like monsters on the other side, guys like Leonard Perkins that are going to be coming off the edge on blitzes. Even though Mason isn't starting, I know they've got big time talent over there on the other side of the defensive line. I like our guys to make the offense move and do what it needs to do to get this win. I don't see either side dominating either side, but I see those tight ends and that offensive line really coming together, adding the 6'7" tight end on one side that ended up getting the start, and Kyle Morlock, and Jaheim Bell, the athletic tight end on the other end. It just sets up for a lot of success for Florida State. And this one's going to be a battle. There's no doubt about it. I'm not going to give you a crazy take, that one side's going to match the other, but Florida State's coming in there confident, and they're ready to execute.
Yeah, let me ask you, both of you, how do you feel about Florida State's, secondary? I was a huge fan of Jamie Robinson. I always cheer for the 3-star recruits, and I just loved watching him play. So now he's not there anymore. Let me know what you guys think about the back end of the D.
I think Shaheem Brown, and that's the guy who made the block on the field goal. He played a lot in that game. A lot of times everybody likes to talk about the 4-2-5 that Florida State runs with Coach Fuller's defense, but we really had 3 safeties on the field a lot last year. So Shaheem's got a ton of reps. Akeem Dent, a lot of reps, but they also moved one of the corners, Kevin Knowles, back there to be able to bring some more reps, some more experience, as well as having a guy that can be able to cover a little bit better. So Jamie Robinson was that guy who was going to fill in and make the tackles. He was really physical, and I think that's where Shaheem Brown's game is more light. Whereas Akeem Dent and Knowles will be guys that will be able to go from sideline to sideline and really play more not free safety, but center field when it comes to that defense. But much is said a lot about the safety position, and I like to laugh and joke about the 2 weaknesses that Alabama and that Georgia both have are in their safety position. But the one thing that they are very, very good at for the most part are their front 7. So you have to be able to get to the safeties in order to be able to exploit that weakness, which Brian Kelly has done a pretty good job of outside of the Georgia game. He did that against Alabama and Alabama as well. But I think I think that's really where their youth is at. But I think the athleticism and what they're seeing out of Hussey, what they're seeing out of Kirkland, what they're seeing out of they had a junior college safety that came over. They've got more depth than they probably had in the last few years. And they're really excited about what they're bringing in this recruiting class. But I think they're probably a little bit more deep than what people would give credit for. They're just not the well-known part of this defense. It would be the front 7 is what everybody would know more. Really, the front 6, the way we run it, is what more people would know about than that.
Yeah, I just find it's Pat Surtain is the new guy, right?
Absolutely. Conrad Hussey, James Coleman mentioned him, has had an amazing camp. We talked about the different true freshmen or redshirt freshmen making their debuts. That's a name that you might see flash, maybe not right off the bat, getting into the second quarter once they start getting the reserves in there. They talk about him like if there would have been a week 0 game or a Southern Miss or somebody ahead of y'all, that he possibly could have earned that starting spot. Like they're talking about him that high. So I'm really excited to see him if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to speak out of turn. He might be from American heritage too, but I'm not quite sure on that.
And last year, obviously LSU special teams really cost them in major ways. I know Florida State special teams for the most part was very shaky, right?
The kicker position, and that was really the field. We had some field goals. If we score a American football point with our special teams against North Carolina State, we win the game. I think if I remember correctly, we had maybe some misses against Wake Forest. He got a little bit spooked for whatever reason, but I think it was he changed the way that he kicked. He got pretty accurate and pretty got right back on track toward the middle part to the end of the season. So. But as far as our punting game, as far as our return game, it got better last year. It's still not one of our incredible things, except for kickoff return. I believe we had the first kickoff return in quite some time. We had a few this past year, but with Trey Benson returning the opening kickoff against Boston College. So we've got some big guys back there. Also at punt return. Right now, from what I'm understanding, is Keon Coleman will be back there returning kicks, and that's a large individual to go back there and to try to tackle and shore up. But I think with the weapons that this offense has, they're not as concerned about trying to get a bunch of free yardage on special teams as much as they're trying not to lose yardage on special teams. If you don't field a punt and it bounces back another 10 to 15 yards, that will make life a little bit harder on you. And then God knows you guys would know more than anybody about muff punts. A lot of people pick on Yak Johnson and his water gun drill, but you know what we don't do at Florida State? We don't muff punts. So so maybe I think everybody in the nation should go get a super soaker and start chasing around their players with and squirt water on them so that they can get the concentration.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting when you look at, the third phase of the game. I was listening to, I know I butcher his name all the time. John Papuchis, is that how you say his last name?
Yeah.
Um, so he actually got his, and he's a special teams coach at Florida State. He actually got his start at LSU. I did not know that until last year. And he was talking about how this will be the first time he's going up against a Brian Kelly team that is not coached by Brian Polian. And obviously, LSU decided to go separate ways with Brian Polian. It was a little mutual, honestly. And he became an AD at a D3 school. And now LSU is going by a collaborative approach on special teams. And I'm friends with some of the LSU specialists, and I will guarantee you that they are not going to be nearly as bad as they were last year. I was one of the worst special teams units I've ever seen in the history of the SEC. I'm not just talking about LSU. It's all the teams. They were really, really that bad. But they have a good punter, they have a really good deep snapper, and they had a really good kicker. It was just everything, from muffin punts to coverage, holdings, kicking it out of bounds. It was just a mess. So it should be very interesting. And Mark, one guy that I think could have a big game. We're talking about the Louisiana flavor on Florida State's skill position guys. Honestly, it's the Florida guy on LSU's offense that became so key, and that was Mason Taylor. Obviously, the son of Jason, and he went to St. Thomas Aquinas, which obviously everyone watching the show from a Florida perspective knows that high school and all the great pros that they produced. And Mark Mason had one of the best true freshman seasons from a tight end you'll ever see. Now, he's not Kyle Pitts. He's not like just this transcendent tight end prospect, but he is very good. There's really not a whole lot of things he's bad at. And one thing that was very interesting is last year he just kind of had to play a lot as a true freshman by default. They didn't have anyone else really experienced. And he had a difficult time blocking Florida State's very physical front. As the season moved on, his blocking got a lot better. And, people that have played the game will tell you this. Tight end is one of the hardest positions to play as a true freshman because you don't really block a whole lot in high school. So he honestly turned into one of the best tight ends in all of college football. And I think he's going to have a lot better game this year. And you guys correct me if I'm wrong. I've been watching this Florida State defense quite a bit. One thing I think you can get Florida State is over the middle. Am I right or wrong about that? In the shallow middle of the field.
I mean, yeah, especially with the way that you guys run it, you have to be able to shadow. But the problem with that is from what I remember correctly about the game is that that's not necessarily Jaden's game until you go into a prevent mode. That's where a bulk of the yards came was when we went to prevent mode. And I think, I hope, I pray that Adam Fuller has learned to abandon prevent. Prevent we lost to Jackson. We lost to Jacksonville State for a myriad of reasons, but notably we were in prevent. And with the last 5 minutes, and I understand the thought process. Nobody's going to score 14 points in 5 minutes. You're going to do this, but apparently that happens. So, but I think if you continue to play aggressive, you press, you bring the pressure, you force Jada Daniels to get uncomfortable. I think that's where where we will be okay. Where he's really good at, and I don't think people give him enough credit, nor do they give Jordan Travis enough credit. It's because they're athletic quarterbacks. But Jaden Daniels, when he's in a comfortable pocket, Buddy can spin it. And so that's what I think though. But I do agree, like if you do have historically Florida State, if you have a good tight end, you can eat.
Yeah. And one thing that's also very interesting, Mark, we're talking about the familiarity, and especially James does this playing. I have a lot of friends in the coaching industry, and they help me with film studies and all that good stuff. And it is amazing how interconnected these staffs are, right? And one matchup that's very interesting is Adam Fuller against Mike Denbrock, right? You go back to, Fuller with Memphis, and Denbrock was the OC at Cincinnati. And I believe they had a matchup or two during that time. Yeah, they did. They had 1 year where they played each other. I think they actually played twice. And, that's going to be a fun chess match, right? I think obviously last year, I keep going back to him, Lovett just tore us up. We just could not move him. And once that was established, we just didn't have an answer for him or Verse or any of those guys. So it's going to be interesting to see how Verse and how Denbrock goes about blocking, those fronts. And obviously it's going to be interesting to see what Adam decides to do. Let's just say Florida State is down by a lot. Does he get more aggressive? Or if they're up by a lot, does he go into prevent? It's going to be a very interesting sight to see.
Yeah,
I think the other adjustment that's going to have to get made is, and again, this is us going off of what we hope. He was the number 1 D tackle in the transfer portal at one point, and that'll be Brandon Fisk. And what does he do on this level? And is he everything that people are raving about him in camp? I mean, I've seen him. He looks like a Power 5 dominant D tackle. So we'll see with him, and then we'll also see the maturation of Joshua Farmer, which is one of the things that I just find odd. And this is where me and your colleague Carter may have gotten into it a little bit, but and as I didn't want to put words in his mouth, but it's just what I'm listening. And I've talked to Mark about this, I believe, on last week's show. Everybody talks about how improved LSU is, and there is no denying that. They are extremely improved outside of everywhere, probably besides the secondary. And I just believe it's going to take, and they probably are improved there. It's just going to take time because you have so many new pieces that are there. Like, and people say this, like Florida State guys, like we just have like this curse on us, like we just stayed stagnant. Like 87% of your production returns with Keon Coleman, Brandon Fisk, Jaheim Bell. I know I'm missing somebody that I don't want to disrespect. I won't really count the running backs because I don't really know how well. I think he's going to do fine, but we all know what Trey Benson is going to be, and we know what Jordan Travis is. And that's with the Destin Hill coming in that has performed well, but again, he's a true freshman, an older true freshman, but he's a true freshman as well. And I say all these things because I hear, and I agree with the linebacker play. He's really, really good. Kalen DeLoach played very, very well, and nobody's talking about. And Kalen DeLoach had locked a lot of scrambling quarterbacks down this season, as well as Tatum Bethune, as well as a lot of these guys are getting better. And that's kind of the one thing that I'm trying to wrap my mind around when I'm listening to it, because I don't want anybody to believe that we're just going to, that either team is going to walk in and just utterly blow the other one out. I don't think this game is designed that way. But I do think that like a team that won, that returns 87% of their production and got better should probably be spoken about in just a little bit different light when it comes to this game. And at home, essentially.
Yeah.
So it's not like Florida State went to, like this game was played in Orlando last year and we're going to the Superdome this year. They went into New Orleans on the road in a game that, while it was in New Orleans, it was 50-50. Like the stadium, it was very very much, but it's going to, and this one is played outdoors. And it's just a little bit, it's a lot of other things that are going to come into this, but I just I really think it's not disrespectful, because I don't ever think you're like, I always like talking with you, and I like talking with you throughout the season because I gained a lot of perspective on LSU. But I think it's more of the SEC, the people who just believe the SEC brand of football is just that much more dominant than everybody. But when I do believe the SEC West is the best conference in football. Not the SEC. I believe the SEC West, and then Georgia is really good. Yeah. Mark, you'll like this. I actually believe the Big Ten is a better overall conference when it comes to football, top to bottom. I don't have any respect for Vanderbilt.
Come on. Big game, James.
Look at
They haven't
that.
even
Come
finished.
on.
They haven't even finished the
You're just
stadium
saying
yet.
that. You're just
I've been-
saying that
I've been
because
wearing him down for a couple of years now.
you're just saying that because this is Mark's, territory. You're also saying that because Greg Sankey doesn't want y'all, and you're buttering up the Big Ten to fork over the cash to get the Knowles and the Florida market in their conference. I
wouldn't want us either because it would look bad if every time you bring somebody into your conference, they immediately go to the conference championship game. So when you think about Missouri and Texas A&M, Missouri came in and immediately won the West 2 years in a row when they had won nothing in the Big 12. If you bring us into the East, I mean, come on, we already are beating Florida right now. Since desegregation, we've got Florida. We got the edge on Florida with that. Georgia, again, I would never disrespect. I have no reason to disrespect Georgia.
Right.
I'm actually terrified of Georgia. That might be the only school that I'm just like, you know what? If we're in the playoff after seeing what they did to TCU, I'll just be like, you know what? That's going to be a great game. I'm just happy that we're here, and I'm not talking no trash because Kirby got them boys rolling over there.
Yeah, so here's what's interesting. All right. Missouri did win the East, not the West, but your point still stands. They did win. Yeah, they won twice.
My bad. I apologize. It was
no, it's all good. And Gary Pinkel's one of the most underrated coaches. And Mark, I know you agree with that because you're a big coach historian guy. He was so great. And, for me, one thing that I'm really looking forward to for this game, Mark, is – this is a final time that one of these season opening games is going to feel like this, right? Because once the playoff stretches to 12, whoever loses this game really doesn't get hurt in the future. They really don't, right? Because you could probably still lose 2 more games and still get in because people would view it as a good loss. And honestly, and I've took a lot of heat on this on my LSU channel because I have been very complimentary about Florida State. Last year they finished as, a top 10 team in my power ratings. And one thing I really liked about them is they dominated a lot of teams last year. I mean, they blew out some teams that had pulses that were decent. You blew out Syracuse in their building. Of course, Syracuse isn't a great team, but you went in there and got business done against a team that was decent. And you obviously blew out Miami. Miami's not a good football team by any stretch of the imagination, but that's a rival. It's a game that people get up for. And that really impressed me that Florida State was able to enforce their will in those games. I just think, for me, yes, it is true Florida State did get better. The biggest issue, though, for LSU is they were playing a lot of players that are not Power 5 starters. And in particular, a lot of the guys that did play in that week 1 game. I know it's an excuse, all right? And I'm tired of giving it, but it's just the truth. One guy at linebacker immediately became the 4th-string linebacker by week 3. The right tackle who started in the game last year is now at Tulane. The right guard didn't get a start for the rest of the season, and the center was stripped of his center duties the very next week. So I give Florida State a lot of credit in that first game, having their better players out there. Some of that was the week 0 stuff. And, when you look back and LSU's comeback in that game, it took some fluky things to happen for LSU to make that, a 1-point game in the grand scheme of things. But, I know this is just the thing that a lot of Florida State fans have been hearing, but it's true. LSU just became a way better football team once Brian Kelly got the ball kind of moving and he finally found the lineups that worked best for what he had to work with. Now, one thing that is a little concerning from an LSU standpoint is they were far better offensively at home than away from it. And that's going to be very key for the LSU offense. And there are some good things, right? They were in this building last. This was the last game that they played, obviously, in Camping World Stadium. I do think that matters. And one little thing, Mark, and obviously Jordan Travis has a great work ethic. All my sources tell me he is a all-out great leader, all those things. Jaden Daniels is as well. This is a guy who had the keypad changed at the LSU facility for him to be able to go watch film past 11 p.m. This was a guy who yesterday admitted publicly that many a times he went back and rewatched the Florida State film again and again and again. And he was like, okay, this is something that I would have done differently. This is something that I would have done here or there. Jaden's physique has gotten thicker. He looks more like a quarterback instead of, the young kid who started as a true freshman from Arizona State. And this is a guy who has said in every interview, Mark, that he is going to be more vertical. Now, obviously, Jordan Travis did not have as many poor performances as Jaden Daniels did last year. He had 2 games where he just wasn't great. But I do think Jaden's game does give himself some immense upside. And if we see that upside, I think it's going to be a shootout. So let me ask all 3 of you guys. Do you believe this game is a game where it's 35-28, 35-31, that kind of game?
Yeah, so my prediction is 38-31.
Wow.
That was
LSU.
I've stuck with that. No, Florida State. 38-31 Florida State. I've stuck with that prediction for a long time. Some things have changed. I've thought about maybe stretching it when Mason Smith went out, but I'm going to stick with that original prediction. But just before we go past it, you and James both had great points about the talent and FSU getting better and LSU having that, your take for them having a dramatic, improvement that you guys see. I think that from a Florida State person's context, 20-21, 21-22, Florida State lost a lot. Like guys like Jermaine Johnson who could go in the first round, or even guys that were borderline would go. That's kind of the big difference this year. Like heading into last year, there were a ton of question marks heading into that LSU game. Maybe not as many as y'all had, but just the fact that we were able to bring so many people, and that's why we harp on that 87% stat so much, is just because isn't something that's happened in close to a decade almost, that people are like coming back to make this run. And then when we were able to hit the portal, we were able to do it just to get better, kind of. One of this guy, one of these guys, 2 of these guys, more than just having to plug a hole. But yeah, 38-31 is where I'm at, and I'm ready for it, man. Let's kick this thing off.
I think it will be a shootout because you do have a lot of people that are better. And I think just to piggyback on what George said, Jordan Travis entering last year with everybody picked on him as he can't throw the ball. And that's what people say. He was a running back that throws, to a guy who I believe if he wins one of those 3 games, which was in the sights, he's probably going to New York. Trey Benson, we have to remember, I don't think Trey Benson had over 50 total yards of rushing. He was often injured. He was a very big question mark. Johnny Wilson had under 200 yards, 200 career receiving yards. A lot of hodgepodge of offensive linemen coming in. We thought Jared Verse could be good, and nobody knew what Jared Verse could do on the Power 5 level. He went from FCS to Power 5, so a bigger jump than what we're going to see with Brandon Fisk. Fabian Lovett was good, but we didn't know how good. He still hadn't become that dominant guy. And we had just lost Jermaine Johnson, who we all knew was that guy. And also coming off the heels of people still reeling off of the Travis Hunter. So a lot of the question marks that we had were proven right, regardless of what the scenarios are and what the situations were in that game. They had their coming out party in that game. I believe what Verse had, I know Verse had over at least 2 sacks in that game, regardless of who it was against, but he did have that, and the nation got a chance to know exactly who he was. But I do agree that I think it's going to be one of those games that's going to have ebbs and flows. There'll be somebody will jump on top, and not necessarily by like 21 or anything, but somebody will get a two score lead, more of like a 10-point, like up by 10, and then we'll see the game kind of get separated by in the fourth quarter. And I think, I obviously I believe Florida State will win, but I do think, and I heard this in a high school football game that I went to go check out. This game does not define either team when they lose. It should be a good, unless it's a blowout on either side. Then maybe it does define the other team.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a good game, and I do expect to see LSU making a run. And, obviously the only team I think that stands in their way for the West again is obviously Alabama. It would be that way until Saban decides that he's done. But I do believe LSU would be a team that could possibly compete to go play in the SEC championship again. And I think Florida State would be a team that when it's all said and done will be competing for an ACC championship. And that's what's fun. And I think you brought it up, Carter, in the beginning with the new way that the landscape is moving, as well as, obviously the playoff, but also the SEC going to a 9-team schedule in conference. You're no longer going to see games like this because they're dangerous. You don't want to have – there's no need to take that risk for the extra L out of conference when you still feel you have a tough conference schedule, tough conference slate ahead of you. So the goal would be, as I was explaining to fans, as a guy who covers the NFL, the goal is going to now be more of an NFL mindset where it's cool to win your division. That's a goal. It's cool to win your conference. That's always a goal. The goal is to get to the playoffs, though. If you can get to the playoffs, you can win the Super Bowl. If you get to the playoffs, you can win a national championship. And that's the overall overarching goal, is to be able to put yourself in position to continue consistently be in the college football playoff.
Yeah, I want to shout out Hal, 2 or 3 Not Good as One, Joshua. These are a lot of people that are from my channel. Please subscribe to Mark, and he does a really good job. And James is going to be on my channel tomorrow night. And I'm really freaking excited about that. We had so much fun on his Den Media. Check him out. Mark, I'm about to have to skedaddle, but I want to say thanks for everything you do for CFB.
Yeah, I think the difference between the two and the running game is Jordan Travis 90% of the time is going to be running more to set up the pass and try to get free to where he can hit somebody downfield. Not that he won't take off and run, but pretty sure Florida State isn't going to be scheming up many schemed quarterback runs. On the other side of the ball, Jaden Daniels is such a threat and just so advanced at that level of his game. I'm expecting them to still have him, whether it's just 5, 6, 7 designed quarterback runs. I'm expecting to see that from him. And yeah, I just have to say that more Jaden Daniels on the quarterback running than Jordan Travis. It just seems he's less and less running. I believe he only had 400 yards all last year. And one of the kind of keys for LSU's game, if you talk to a lot of different people, I'm sure Carter probably would have said so too, but 100 yards rushing from him, that's a big landmark for them and wouldn't look too good for us. When he tore us up last year, that's what happened. He took off running. So on Florida State's side, make sure guys like Jared Verse don't get too excited and rush up those lanes and keep him in the pocket and make him throw it versus running. If we can limit his running, the more we can do that, the better.
Yeah, I think one, context matters. Jaden Daniels is an athletic quarterback, but I think both of them are better pocket passers than what people give them credit for. And they both only want to extend the plays. And so what Jaden Daniels did, and you can look at, if you don't have to believe me, the box score tells you everything. Like in a prevent situation, Jaden Daniels can't kill your legs because you're only bringing 4 and you're dropping back everybody. And he did a great job of taking away and gaining big chunks of yards. He got 114 yards that game. I personally think for them to win it, he's got to be a better quarterback overall. And he didn't have a bad game. He was 25 for 34, but he only had 209 yards. And he has to be able to attack Florida State deep. Now, this isn't me reporting this. This is what LSU is reporting, that they're still not seeing him attack deep in some of the scrimmages or in some of the practice reports against a secondary that's not as good as their secondary was last year. So, but if he's able to attack Florida State deep with the 1,000-yard receiver returning, who didn't do much against Florida State, but really developed and came on toward the end of the season, I think that's really where it comes down to. It's which one is going to be able to play the traditional role of the quarterback. Because I'm going to be honest with you, they probably don't want Jaden Daniels rushing 16 times. He led all ball carriers last year. So to be honest with you, I have no idea what Noah Cain can do because he only ran the ball 7 times last year against us. I do believe Noah Cain's a good running back. I know he was a prep guy that we came after pretty high, and I know they have some talent, and I know they're wide receivers. It was supposed to be Boutte, who was supposed to be the guy last year that did not do much, but I do know that LSU, one thing they have, and me and Carter talked about this on my show, is talent in the skill position because they recruit the state of Louisiana extremely well.